There's a certain stripe of retro gamer that says graphics don't matter, only gameplay. That 4K, path traced, HDR, blah 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 is just a false idol. But in our hearts, in private moments, retro gamers know they grew up being suckers for graphics too, at least as far back as the 80s. Dragon's Lair looked just like a cartoon. Pit Fighter and Mortal Kombat looked so real with their digitized characters. Metal Slug, Samurai Showdown, Donkey Kong Country, Gran Turismo, Final Fantasy VII. Many of these, not all, but many, are good games too, but almost all might have been relative footnotes had they not been lookers. And speaking of, the beat 'em up was a curious genre whose reign of popularity from the late 80s to the mid 90s corresponded almost exactly with the era of big sprites as the way to attract eyeballs in the arcade. Unlike fighting games, which made a successful commercial transition to the new hotness, polygons, beat 'em ups had some cult classics and some duds, and then, at least in the US, it seemed like the only notable genre releases after the mid 90s were Castle Crashers and Scott Pilgrim, both from the XBLA era. From there, you have to skip forward to the Switch era to find other beat 'em ups people would actually recognize the names of: Shredder's Revenge, River City Girls, Streets of Rage 4. Graphical appeal is fickle. It will make you and break you. It invites a wide but shallow crowd that isn't particularly interested in the game's intricacies. Lord knows that when I was playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at Chuck E. Cheese, I just wanted to pop in quarters, bash skulls with friends, and see the cool characters that I recognized. In later years, once my infatuation with the idea of controlling Donatello wore off, revisiting those Konami beat 'em ups left me with a much lower opinion of them. But better beat 'em ups existed, and only revealed their superiority once I took the time to see them for what they were, instead of being dazzled by sprite work and IP. My in depth experience with beat 'em ups over the years is pretty sparse. King of Dragons and the Ninja Warriors games are far from the only ones I've tried, but they are really the only ones that I have spent enough time with to properly wrap my head around and get anywhere near mastery with. And both of those are pretty atypical. The King of Dragons is much more focused on opportunistic single strikes, sort of a hit and run approach, rather than combos and grapples. And the Ninja Warriors games don't even have a Z axis. And one of the characters can't even jump. If you're looking at more straightforwardly traditional beat 'em up games, I did last year really try to wrap my head around Final Fight. And for as impressed as I was with it, it was also way too hard for me. In this video, we're taking a look not at Final Fight, but at its kind of fellow traveler, brother from another mother, another gritty street violence justice sort of game. Also, really well regarded, but much more approachable: Streets of Rage 2. As a Genesis game, its sprite work doesn't quite dazzle in comparison to arcade beat 'em ups, but it makes up for it with a soundtrack by one of the greats, Yuzo Koshiro. This being, like Androidunos 2, a short game designed to be replayed and mastered, I resolved to 1cc it on the highest difficulty I could. I was cocky enough to not start on easy mode, despite Final Fight having recently turned me into a quivering paste. I picked the obvious normal guy, Axel, looked up a move list, and just tried my best. Surprisingly, I managed to roll credits on my first attempt without getting a game over, albeit barely, and after using both continues. So long as you can consistently hit Axel's special attack, Grand Upper, and make a point to not get surrounded, I honestly think this is a very reasonable game to do blind. 2 more attempts and I eked out my normal mode 1cc. But since that 1cc only took me 4 hours to get, I knew that I wasn't going to be satisfied stopping there. After briefly considering a character swap, I doubled down on Axel for the rest of my playtime. Hard was a considerable step up from normal, and my first credit ran out on stage 6 of 8. From there, I started to really notice specific dangerous screens in the game, long stretches between healing items, or particularly nasty combinations of enemies, or both. A natural ebb and flow of safe and dangerous situations, but as with the tides, the particulars of each wave were unpredictable. Unlike Androidunos 2, which is a very deterministic game made chaotic only by the consequences of your own decisions, there is a ton of random enemy behavior to grapple with in Streets of Rage 2. Sometimes an enemy breaks left, sometimes right. Playing Streets of Rage means sometimes dealing with a bad break and sometimes a lucky one. It took me closer to a week to get my 1cc on hard, but I got there too. The jump to hardest was much steeper than the jump to hard. At first, getting a clear at all was out of reach even with both continues. More screens were getting more difficult combinations of enemies, and enemies were getting more aggressive too. Over the close to 2 on again, off again weeks I spent trying to tackle hardest mode, I started to see learning the game as a matter of learning 2 entirely different skill sets because of its randomness. Like I said, the game is a mix of bad breaks and lucky ones, and learning to play well requires making the best of both and being able to switch on a dime. From one playthrough attempt to the next, I was learning ways to mitigate and break out of various bad situations, and also learning tricks to remain in control of better situations. I was trying to hold on to both Plan B and Plan A at all times. It's a lot. Had I been just an honest kid with a Genesis, getting a 1cc would undoubtedly have taken me substantially longer. But the reality of life in the internet age is that when a particular segment was confusing, for example, dealing with double jetpack enemies in stages 5 and 7, or dealing with quadruple kickboxers in stage 6, I had resources at my disposal which did not exist in 1992. I could quick save and quick load to drill problem sections. Better yet, I could watch other players' playthroughs on YouTube to see how their approaches differed from mine. I found myself even trying to make sense of the playthroughs of Anthopants, a streamer who plays on the game's secret ultimate difficulty mode Mania, and has commentated not just 1cc's but no death clears with 3 of the game's 4 characters. But Anthopants is on an entirely different level to the point that his techniques are more like those of speedrunners performing skips. Technically humanly possible, but it was going to be easier for me to learn to beat the game on hardest in a more naive way than it would have been to replicate, for example, his strategy to spawn just one jetpack enemy at a time on the stage 7 elevator. Still, watching other players is a good way to get yourself out of your own rut, and it was a good periodic prompt to revisit my own strategies. I was getting better, but I was also not getting good enough, and my best runs still involved continuing and losing another couple of lives before closing it out. Normally, I think of intense arcade style games as being gratifying and a good use of time, but also demanding, something I don't always have the energy for. But just as I was running out of time to get my hardest mode 1cc, when I needed to pivot to start putting together this video, I had the most stressful workday I'd had in half a year. Came home feeling like a beaten down husk, and I turned the game on anyway. I can't decide if I was beyond caring or was especially resolute, but either way, it felt different. The stage 3 choke point with double ninjas followed by a knife guy and 2 whip girls. I barely survived, but I survived. Stage 4, I lost 1 life on the elevator and another against the boss because I got greedy trying to get full damage grand uppers instead of being happy with half damage, like an idiot. But then, I had my first stage 5 where I reached the boss without a single death and only lost a life at all because I was too cautious in the last stretch and timed out. Then, I got my first ever deathless stage 6 and started to think that success was, well, definitely not inevitable, but at least possible, which was a massive improvement. Stage 7's factory segment was messy, but not disastrous, and then the infamous Stage 7 elevator. Oh, it was bad, but I'd done worse. The jetpack guys went well, the ninjas were sort of acceptable, the kickboxer bozos were a nightmare like they always are, and the knife and fat guys combo really wasn't bad. Then the robots folded like cardboard, and I walked into Stage 8 with a much bigger stack of lives than I thought I ever would. By the time I was buttoning up the claw guy and the whip girls fight cleanly, I was honestly starting to believe it would happen. Shiva's AI was starting to make sense to me, and then all I had left was Mr. X, and, well, Mr. X was a demon. I should have practiced him more. And he still didn't make a ton of sense to me on hardest. But at this point, my incompetence was no match for the snowballing advantage of the extra lives I'd accumulated, so even though the final fight was disappointingly messy, Jesus, I got it. I don't got Mania, but I got this, one of the most gratifying gaming experiences I've had this year. The randomness, the ebb and flow, made this 1cc feel so different from Androdunos 2. I never knew when I was going to fall victim to an instant beating, experiencing stochastic terrorism as a leisure activity, but I would definitely sign up for another, or try climbing the normal, hardest ranks again with a different character like Max. Up next, the completely unfamiliar genre of grand strategy, blending kingdom management with battlefield concerns. I tried taking a spoonful of sugar approach here and parlaying my decades-long fondness for Three Kingdoms era ancient China to give myself the best chance of accepting this new genre. I've got 2 options here: Creative Assembly's Total War Three Kingdoms and Koei Tecmo's venerable Romance of the Three Kingdoms series. But it turns out I don't like either at all. So honestly, I have no idea how the next episode is going to go.